I made a Dead by Daylight map. To prove that behavior are actually just lazy. It's got a forest. It's got an interactive, solvable murder mystery. It's got water features. And the coolest main building ever to touch this boring game. Welcome to the Twisted House. But how do you actually make a Dead by Daylight map and do it all within 6 months? Because that's the deadline I had. If we're talking about a rough overview of how to make a Dead by Daylight map, it's fairly simple. It's called environment art in game art, really, and it's basically the process of making the level, of making the place that you're in, that the player and other things interact in. It's like the story stage. So, that is broken down into these stages, I'd say, which is research and planning, then your story, grey boxing and layout, then there's general sort of big assets, then your sort of prop creation of your hero asset, then there's your lighting, which is really important, then there's, I would go into shader and procedural elements, and then you've got your hitbox and interactions. But there's a lot more in each of those areas that takes a lot of expertise and a lot of bloody time. So, first off, research and planning, and this is pretty much the stage where you're just trying to, in my opinion, get a vibe of actually what you want to make, the direction you want to go in, and how you want to roughly go about it. I ended up going and doing a lot of research, and that mainly involved playing my favourite game of Dead by Daylight to get a bit of a feel as to how big the maps were, how they operated, what sort of feel they had, and thankfully online there were loads of these really helpful diagrams that showed the rough layout of things, so where main buildings were, how they roughly were sized, and on top of that, an amazing helpful thing was the actual square meterage of how big they were, which would help a lot with the actual scope of this project to make sure that I didn't just make a whole new Fortnite level and then wonder why I couldn't finish it in 6 months. But after doing the research, I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to make. But before I started making anything else, I had to choose the engine that I wanted to use for this project, and there was a couple options. You have Godot, which is a free open source style one like Blender but for game engines. You have Unreal Engine, which is pretty much the graphics powerhouse. You have Unity, which is more lightweight but not as great to get good graphics and takes a little bit more frustration. And there's things like CryEngine, which I didn't have that much experience with. So to me, the choice was clear. I chose Unreal Engine because I wanted to make a scene that looked fabulous. Unreal Engine is launched, you make your project and you give it a name, like the fabulous name I gave it, you wait for it to do all of its business, and here we are. Yeah, this is pretty daunting now that I look at it. It's completely empty. So how do we go from this to that? Well, the next step, in my opinion, would be figuring out the story. I think every good environment art or anything that is to do with game art needs a good story. You need to have a good idea of what the thing has gone through, how it has lived, the life that it has had, so that you can properly communicate that to the player. And so I got to writing, and the story of my scene was this. This was the home of the Magnuses. It was the Magnus estate. It was nestled in the Canadian forest, very, very deep and isolated from everyone. This family was extremely wealthy. They'd made their money over many, many years in the 1960s from Magnus Pharmaceuticals, which was one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in America at the time. And at the top of it all was Harvey Magnus. He was brilliant, there was no denying it. A proper genius, some could say. But when greed came a little bit too far, and the government ended up knocking on his door, asking for some new types of drugs, Harvey just couldn't say no. He accepted the government's dodgy offers with glee, rolling in the money, while his company started doing underhand dealings and experiments on people. trying to figure out how to control people's minds a bit better, how to make people a bit more docile. The drugs and the impact that Magnus had could barely be described, until one day it all got a bit too much for him. The school that his kid was attending was going to be soon the testing ground of one of his own drugs, a new concoction that would make kids believe whatever you wanted. And so Magnus tried to retreat into the Canadian forest, taking him and his family into his great estate to try and flee the Americas and just live happily in isolation, hoping to ignore the damage he did. But unfortunately, karma isn't without a sense of humor, with the government deciding what better place to test new experiments and let mad men do what they want right under the Magnus estate's house. And so the family, after many, many years of experimentation, slowly went insane, until the trees grew taller and taller till the family disappeared one by one, only leaving echoes of their past horrors. The government tried to cover it up, putting metal sheets and gratings around the house so that no one could get in, and doing fake investigations just so they could get their research out of there without being noticed. But none of that ever stopped the odd curious wanderer for going into the Magnus estate and wandering around puzzled as they asked, what happened here? So, I'd say that's pretty good. I was happy with the story and I felt like I had a good idea of what I wanted to make now. So that brings us on to the next section, which is grey boxing and layout. And what grey boxing is a really, really helpful way to prototype a whole level without actually having to make anything that you have to commit to. And it's just about using the default assets within the engine, and in Unreal Engine these are like the boxes and the cubes, just so you have a good idea of the general silhouette of the scene. Because if it doesn't look good in this stage, adding a load of nice detail to it won't suddenly make it look good. So, with my research in mind from all the DBD stuff, DBD normally has one big main structure and then a load of smaller substructures. And with my main object, I knew I wanted to make one big house. I have a bit of an obsession with houses and house spaces because I think you can tell a lot about a person or a life based on where they live and what their actual house looks and feels like. And they're really creepy, which is a fantastic plus. But for the two other objects, I really couldn't get a good idea of what I wanted to make. Part of me was thinking like a big boiler room, and then another part of me was thinking maybe a shed with a load of broken cars, and then another part of me was thinking like a sort of like maid's quarters or maid's house to show that they're like really rich and affluent. But the ones I ended up deciding on were a greenhouse and a sort of outhouse slash water mill. I thought the greenhouse would be perfect because it shows the wealth of the family, and as well was a fantastic way for me to get a load of nature and weird plant objects in the scene. And I like the outhouse water mill for the idea of they need to generate electricity. They need to generate a load of this stuff deep in the forest. How are they going to do that? A water mill. Simple. And I really like the idea of getting a water feature in a level because I know Behavior literally haven't done anything with water so far in the games. But what I ended up landing on was this. The nice big house in the middle with the greenhouse to the side to kind of support it, and then off in the other corner, the water mill. But then was probably the scariest part for me, and this was the general big assets, or what I'd like to call set dressing. The actual main big objects that you'd use to just fill out the scene and give it a good breath of life. And at this point, I only had about 5 months left. So I got out my nice little tablet that I normally wrote a lot of things on for notes, and I made a huge list of everything that I could possibly add that would fit with the story or things that I'd want to make. I listed them in order of priority. I wasn't going to make everything on these lists. That was by no means what I do. But at least if I could have a good idea of everything I could make, I could work my way through the list chronologically and know that I'd get a good scene with a lot of good things in them. There's many different ways that you can make game assets. There's high poly to low poly to bake all of the sculpt renders onto it. There's just hard surface modeling and then UV unwrapping and then just hand painting all the textures onto them. There's procedural ways to make loads of objects through programs like speed trees, and I could go on and on and on and on and on. But because I knew I had a lot of things to make, and a lot of the set dressing, in my opinion, didn't matter if it was perfect in every single aspect, I wanted to do this workflow that I call tileable texture hard surface modeling. I don't know if that's the actual term for it, but basically what you do is you take a tileable texture, and a tileable texture is a texture that when you put it side to side by itself, you won't be able to tell where the seam is. So it's tileable, it can tile easily. And you take that tileable texture and you model out of that texture. So say I wanted a wooden box. What I'd do is I'd make a tileable texture for a wood. I would then make a load of different wooden planks out of that tileable texture, and then I'd take all those wooden planks that I've made, build them up and put them together, and then I'd have a wooden crate. And the benefits of this workflow is the main thing is it's quick. You can make a lot of assets very, very fast. And in my opinion, for big assets that are just generally lying around in a scene, I think it's a perfect workflow. So I needed to make a load of tileable textures that I could use for this, and the tileable textures ended up being like paint on a canvas. But how did I make the tileable textures? Because making a texture is quite a pain in the arse, believe it or not. There were two programs that were an absolute godsend. One of them is owned by the Adobe, and it's called Substance Sampler, and this software is amazing. You give it an image, you tell it roughly what this image is, and then it processes it, and then it turns it into a full PBR texture for you within the space of a couple minutes. I can't tell you how much I love this software. Look, I can just give it a wood image, just a piece of wood, and then look, it just gives me a tileable texture of wood. That looks like wood, and that was done within 3 minutes, and I have a whole texture to use. But the second piece of software is called Materialize, and this is a brilliant free piece of software that was used to make the Uncharted games, as it has the amazing ability to accept any sort of type of map, like a roughness map, a normal map, a metallic map, and then you can just flip between the different types of maps and just make the others appear. It's really good. I would recommend it. So I made a load of tileable textures, and when I mean a load of tileable textures, I mean over 100. But it was time to stop waffling, and I just made a load of the objects. It took quite a lot of time, but I'd say the end result, given that everything that you're seeing here was made with just tileable textures, I think they look pretty good. But now is the prop creation. I'd been putting this off for quite a while, as it required a bit more of a bespoke hand and were the main things in the scene which mattered, as this would cover all of the hero assets in a scene. But what is a hero asset? A hero asset is something that your focus is mainly on in the game. Think about swords or guns or characters or like real important items within the game. The main hero assets in my scene were going to be the house itself, as that was the main focus. The level's called the Twisted House, of course it's going to be. So I looked up ways you could make big buildings quicker. There were a couple options. Houdini, which I had no experience with, or something called a house kit. And a house kit is a thing where you make a load of different walls, a load of different windows, some doors, but deliberately make them on a grid-like pattern so they can snap together like using Lego bricks. So I made a house kit, as easy as it sounded. I planned out all of the walls, all of the different windows, and if I needed something else, I'd just make a new wall and then build on it in Unreal. So after I'd made all the walls and windows, I took all those into Unreal Engine, made sure that they were scaled and everything correctly, and then just started building the house. And then if I needed something else, I'd go and make it and then do the same on the house and cover it with all the little new bits. So slowly but surely, the house built up with new walls and new objects until it was finished, and I loved the final result. But looking at it, it didn't feel menacing enough from my original grey box, but thankfully I had a kit, so I could just build up new parts of the house, which is exactly what I did to make it fit the vibe and the tallness that I wanted. And I thought it improved it so much and really fit that nice, insane family feeling that I was going for. But the scene was feeling quite empty, in my opinion, at this point. And that was because I hadn't really focused on the shaders or the procedural elements of the nature yet. But you might be wondering, what are shaders and procedural elements? And essentially, they are little bits of programs which take a set of inputs, do a load of maths and weird cool stuff to it, and then you get a consistent set of outputs. So for instance, there was the nice little waterworks going through the scene that I made a shader and a procedural blueprint for, so I could drag it out in a certain direction. The flow would follow that, and it would also interact with the collision meshes around it to give it a nice ripple and the effect that it was actually water. There was the actual trees and the way that I made them sway. Basically, I made a shader that calculated how close they are off to the ground, and then randomized it based on a noise map around them, and then just swayed them, and then the leaves as well. There was a nice little shader for the fire, which I was pretty happy with, and I did it so that I could vertex paint between them, so I could in-engine paint which ones were fiery, and there's loads of other shaders throughout the map, which are even more complex and I can't be arsed getting into. But then there was the nature, and there's a few different ways you can make nature. Once again, you can make them all by hand, and was the process with nature that I was a lot more used to, or there was the other option to completely learn a whole new set of processes of geometry nodes inside of Blender that I'd never done before, and would spend even more time learning that to then procedurally make a load of flowers so that it would look more natural. So the choice seemed pretty obvious, and I went with the one that would make me more miserable and take a lot longer. So I went away and learnt how geometry nodes inside of Blender works, and it took bloody ages, but I ended up making it so that I could now draw pretty flowers, and when I draw a line, a pretty flower would be made, and then I could export that to Unreal Engine, and I could draw a nice glory vine, and then I could change all the different parameters on the side to make how thick it was, or how big it was, or how many flowers it had, and I did this with roses, I did this with bushes, I did this with anemones and wisterias, and I drove myself mad. So, while tired and weary, I took all of my objects into Unreal Engine, used the Unreal Engine foliage editor, which is a fantastic part of Unreal Engine, which makes foliage look absolutely beautiful. I made a quick little shader for each of the different foliage types to make them wobble and just move a little bit and refract light a lot more nicely. I put them loads around the map and just made it so that everything felt really, really overgrown. And this was probably my favorite part of the project. I was exhausted. I probably had about 2 more months left that I could spend on this realistically. I was working loads to actually get money so that I could eat, and I had to try and find motivation to get towards the end of the project. And I was struggling a bit. I was spending so much of my time working between working on uni work, working on work for money, that I ended up being really miserable, and I kind of ended up hating the project a bit. Don't get me wrong, I'm really happy with the way it turned out now, but I wasn't very happy at the time. My life had become work, and I ended up neglecting a lot of the relationships in my life for the people around me who I actually cared about a lot, just so that I could make something pretty, and I'm sorry about that. I wish I could go back and focus more on the people that mattered to me at the time, rather than just being a workaholic. And I hope that one day, to the people that I hurt with my addiction to work, I hope one day you can forgive me. Because I realise now that I've got a bad relationship with work, that when I get miserable and when I get sad and when life gets hard, all I do is retreat into my work more, and I just work harder because I know it's the one thing that can keep me safe. So I continued with the Twisted House. I continued working more on this project that was driving me mad until it was done, and next was the lighting. Initially at the start of this project, I'd done what I'd call a general lighting pass, but I hadn't really gone further than that, and looking at the scene at this stage without any proper lighting in it, it looked kind of terrible. One, if you can use assets and other things within the scene to create lighting, you've done a good job. And two, contrast creates focus. With those two things in mind, I made a load of assets such as lamps, fairy lights, torches, and the TVs, which are probably my favorite part because it did a really nice shader effect with that, to put lighting throughout the scene in a nice, natural way. But if you'd like to download this scene for yourself and actually have a better look in detail as to the smaller elements and just explore, then please do. There's a file in the description, click that, download it, extract the file, and double-click the exe, and you'll be able to wander around my scene. And there is one 4-leaf clover hidden on the whole map. There's one of them. If you find it, be the first one, send me a DM on Discord, and I'll buy you a Dead by Daylight DLC. And then there was the last section, which was the hitbox and interactions. And honestly, this was really quite boring and not very interesting. All I did was go around and just make sure people couldn't go where they couldn't go, and that I wasn't generating the mesh twice and lagging the game. And during that time, while I was going around the whole level, I went around and did a load of touch-ups. I added a bit of nature here, or maybe an object there, or maybe another TV or lamppost over there, with a load of little final touch-ups to just make the scene have that little bit of extra jazz I wanted. And with that, it was done. I'd finally completed my massive project, but I still needed something else to sink my teeth into. So I decided to start a Dead by Daylight YouTube channel. Then the DBD show was born. But obviously, I'm more than up for more game art stuff in the future. If you'd like to hire me, Behavior, or anyone else in the gaming industry, my details are in the description. But for now, I'll be making more amazing DBD videos on this channel right here. So why don't you click on this video coming up next.